Jennifer. Welcome back to the All Monitor Brief.
Hi, Kristen.
Jennifer, tell me where you are, what time it is, what's the mood, how's the weather?
So I'm in Dubai. I spent last week in Abu Dhabi and then the week before in Riyadh. It's around 11:30 and I'm sitting in my balcony drinking coffee.
Oh, fun. Nice. So I am talking to you from Washington, D.C., which has gone through quite the tornado shift with former President Donald Trump now becoming president-elect. So now he's president-elect. He'll return to the White House on January 20th. I am dying to know, you wrote a really good piece on Trump and the Gulf, his relationship with the region. Obviously, it's not a monolith. These different countries have different priorities. Saudi has different priorities than the UAE, the Abraham Accords that were in the mix in 2020. Let me turn over to you and just ask, what will a Trump 2.0 look like with Gulf relations?
I think when Trump comes back to the office next year, he will find that the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and all the Gulf states have changed. They are used to him. They like his style. They like the fact that he's transactional. Most of the Gulf economies, particularly the UAE, they put business first when it comes to their bilateral relations. So they like that Trump has a similar approach. But what he would find very different is that in the meantime, in the last 4 years, the Gulf states have formed their own alliances. They have, their own equations with different world powers. The UAE has held COP28. It has joined BRICS this year, and things are very different for Trump. And in terms of how he would expect them to respond to him, he might find that they would respond very differently to him.
I mean, over the past 4 years, has Trump's business empire, has his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, been in the region? Like, has there been ties that have kept up despite him not being in the political highest office in the United States?
So Trump's business interests have increased, but in terms of Kushner's visits to the Middle East and having a more public role, we didn't really see that during the last 4 years. But during the last Trump presidency, we had the Abraham Accords. We had lots of Israeli businesses that, traded with the UAE, and the trade still continues. I did another story earlier which talked about how trade continues to increase and could reach about 3.3 billion, which is the highest in spite of the Gaza war. The trade has continued. So Trump's legacy with the Abraham Accords is still being felt, but in terms of how the Gulf states would want to engage with that legacy and have similar kinds of equations would be different this time.
So I think what it sounds like you're saying is that maybe Trump was really forward in connecting with the Gulf in business relationships, peace normalization, recognition of Israel, but that might have brought them to more of a focal point. But when he left, they were still in the focal point. And as you say, they were able to hold COP. There was Saudi-Iran rapprochement. There's different players. You have Russia and sort of this shadow economy of oil that the Gulf partners might be big, no questions asked pliers if certain ships dock. That's interesting. Yeah. Do you think that the Gulf is eager to re-engage with Trump? Did they welcome this news? And I really quick, let's just break down maybe the news instead of the Gulf, right? Let's think about it more like, how did Riyadh maybe respond, and Abu Dhabi, maybe more by country?
So the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia said that he was looking forward to strengthening the historical and strategic relations between the two countries. Mohammed bin Zayed, who is the UAE's ruler, he also extended his congratulations, and he mentioned the 5 decades of strategic bilateral cooperation, and he said that they're united by the enduring ties. And then the Qatari Emir also mentioned shared efforts in promoting security and stability. So these are the words that they used. But I have to say that the person in the Middle East who was most enthusiastic about a Trump return was obviously Netanyahu. The Gulf states, are congratulating him, but the U.S. will be among one of the many partners they have. And Trump is not the sole partner that they are looking forward to engaging, because now they have all these equations to maintain. The Saudi-Iran rapprochement that you mentioned was facilitated by China. That's increasingly playing a big role when it comes to trade relations and even playing a diplomatic role in the region. You mentioned the chips. The UAE does have attracted investments from Microsoft, and it has other equations with China as well. It's a BRICS member now, and that has opened up opportunities. Gulf oil companies are investing more and more in China. They're looking eastward, so they have other options. The U.S. is still there. It is, as these leaders have said, it is a strategic relationship that goes back several decades. And I spoke to a political commentator who's based in the UAE, and he had some very strong words that these are not client states of Washington, and they are standing independent, that they can have these relationships without Washington telling them what to do anymore. And I think Trump will find it very difficult to put pressure on these countries when they are now independent. When I say independent, I mean they are taking decisions on their own. They are forming relationships that are important to them economically and strategically.
Yeah, you bring up really interesting points. It's just a different playing field, and therefore it's a different negotiating table. And
Exactly.
The Gulf states have many levers to pull than just a Trump's bank account. Okay, and who do we think there will be the quickest reassumption of ties? Would it be, I want to say, did the Qataris congratulate first after Netanyahu, of course, but did they congratulate, who, I'm just curious which country will be the quickest to maybe invite Trump, or will Trump invite to the White House, or will we see phone calls between?
I think in terms of the world leaders that spoke to Trump, the Saudi crown prince did speak to him later that day, even though the Saudi message came much later than Netanyahu, but he did speak to Trump. And in terms of phone calls, Trump spoke to Modi, he spoke to the Saudi crown prince, so he's still focused here. You can still see that he wants to maintain these relations. And I think, at least from the Saudi perspective, they are quite happy that Trump is back, because Biden didn't have a good relationship, even when he was trying to put some pressure on the Saudis when it came to oil policy. They were not as responsive to him as they had been to Trump previously. In terms of the chronological order, it was Qatar that congratulated him first, and then it was the UAE and Saudi Arabia. But I think in terms of actual conversations over phone calls, the Saudi crown prince did speak to him. I also would like to mention that the UAE's ruler visited Washington in his first ever presidential visit, which was in October, and they spoke about technology. So the relationship with the US is still very much important. But the other thing that we need to remember is, because of the Gaza war, I think a lot of the leaders here are very cautious about what the U.S. would want from the Gulf states. While Abraham Accords did happen during the last Trump presidency, it would be very difficult to expect something like the Gulf states that are navigating a very delicate situation, and in the region where all of these states are unified in calling for the establishment of a Palestinian state, for a ceasefire. So they're going to be cautious, and they would wait and see what Trump and his allies and Kushner would have to say about the Middle East and about Palestine before being too enthusiastic or coming across that way.
Yeah, dare I say, I think you can even see some of that in what you just said. For example, the big prize for Washington is who can get Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. So Saudi Arabia has maybe more of a leverage than the Qataris, who are currently hosting Hamas or a negotiating partner, have shown signs of frustration. But the Saudis, they have more cards to deal. MBS also has to be cautious. Public opinion in Saudi Arabia is favorable of the Palestinian cause, and he is a monarch after all.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's always the focus on the Abraham Accords because it's this diplomatic deal that was struck. But for example, when Trump was in the White House, a Washington Post columnist, Jamal Khashoggi, was dismembered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. That happened under a Trump Washington. I don't think the report was released that quite pointed the finger so directly until Biden came in. But is that at all a consideration, or should journalists just wish their advocates goodbye?
It's an interesting point that you raised, because I attended the Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh last week, and that's known as Davos in the desert, and that took place after Khashoggi, and a lot of investors were cautious then because this showed the overreach of the Saudi state and how this was also an attack on a US based columnist or a correspondent. But over the years, it seems that people have short memories. These investment conferences are now well attended. People seem to have moved on, even though when it comes to the execution rates in Saudi Arabia for its internal, for its domestic prisoners has increased, but people still continue to visit Saudi Arabia, continue to do business, and the Saudi economy is also now primed to attract more foreign investors who continue to pour money into the Saudi state. We also heard from the Public Investment Fund that wanted to reallocate resources more domestically, and Neom, the deputy CEO, said he wanted more foreign investment. So in terms of the actual impact on Saudi Arabia's investment credibility, it doesn't seem to have changed, and I think most people have moved on from that. Even at FII, we saw Elon Musk live stream and speak at the event, and it seems like no one really talks about this. So I think when it comes to Khashoggi, the region has moved on to an extent, and investors no longer seem to think of it as something that they need to concern.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's sort of an old topic, but I always am interested in it only because I remember some U.S. senators, speaking of races in the U.S., some U.S. senators said, I'll never visit there again. I think it was Lindsey Graham who was the Republican senator, was quite critical. But now you see the committee was in MBS's winter resort or whatnot, whatever you want to call it, last winter, and there was these, photos of them smiling and whatnot. And so I just think it's interesting how quickly the tides can turn. Obviously, 2018 Saudi Arabia looks very different than 2024. So, that is a consideration. But yeah, what else, kind of as maybe the final thought or question is, what is the most interesting thing you've heard over the past few days since Trump was elected?
I think people here expected Trump to win, but they didn't expect that this would be a landslide win. Both Americans based here and Emiratis and Saudis, they didn't expect him to win by this kind of margin. So I think there's surprise. They're still processing what's happened. But in terms of what it means for Washington, I think the Gulf states still matter very much for the U.S. If they want to engage with the Middle East. Netanyahu is a great ally, but you also need not your former allies, but your other bilateral partners to continue to engage with the Middle East. And I get the sense that they see Trump as being more involved, but they are not expecting big promises from him. But they would be open to continuing the existing relationship with other partners so that they can feel secure and move forward when it comes to building up their economies or even their security infrastructure.
Yeah, it's a multipolar world after all. There's not just
exactly
one position of power. Okay, Jennifer, thank you so much. We really appreciate you giving us insight into thinking around Gulf U.S. ties, all from your deck.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.